Aeonian Resources is looking for copper in British Columbia's Purcell Basin. This is the same geological belt that's produced major deposits just across the border in Montana. The company has identified a 50-kilometer copper corridor with multiple drill-ready targets. They're backed by permits and Indigenous partnerships. Joining me now is Andy Randall, CEO of the company, who'll teach us a lot more about Aeonian. So, Andy, your project, it's called the Koocanusa Copper Project, and it sits in what you call an overlooked district in British Columbia when we're looking at the website and how it's described. How so?
Yeah, so the Purcell Basin is a geological basin. It's 1.5 billion years old. It formed back when the continents were rifting apart in this area. And what we see is quite a rich level of diverse deposition of mineralization. So the Purcell Basin is probably most famous for the Sullivan mine, which is currently owned by Teck. It's not producing anymore, but it did for over 100 years. And it was one of the largest lead, silver, zinc, tin mines in the world at the time. And that's in a little town called Kimberley, which is just north of our project area. But since that kind of rush of that mine and the focus on that area kind of came to an end in 2004, 2006 kind of time, the area's kind of, I wouldn't say stagnated. There's been exploration in there, but there hasn't been a lot of looking for these big systems again. But what we're seeing in recent years is a bit more of an interest coming back into this area again, looking mainly for those base metals. But what we've done is we've identified that there's this corridor. The Purcell Basin itself stretches right down into Montana and Idaho, and the geology obviously doesn't know the borders. It continues through this area. So we looked at some rocks that were in the basin here south of the town of Cranbrook. And when they carry on into the States, Hecla has recently kind of come together and consolidated a whole bunch of sedimentary copper deposits and mines down there. So we thought, do we have the same opportunity here in Canada? And so over the last, it's been about 6 years now that we've been working on this in the private space. We've developed what we've got now at Koocanusa, which, as you mentioned, is this a 50-kilometer long fertile corridor, copper corridor that we see there.
Well, you specifically say you're looking for sedimentary copper. What is that?
It's the unpopular form of copper, but it does form 20% of the world's supply from sedimentary systems. And the reason I say it's unpopular is because in BC, or in North America in general, we're much more familiar with porphyry systems. I'm sure that, we've all heard of, and the listeners have heard of porphyry systems. But sedimentary copper is, as I say, it's a big provider of copper globally. And when you look at other continents such as Europe and Asia and Africa and even Australia now, you see a lot of these sedimentary copper mines. Some of the ones in Europe have been operating for over 1,000 years. This is like the original sources of copper through history. And the reason that we don't really see much of it explored over here isn't because these systems don't exist. It's because people favor the porphyries. Geologically, we're trained. We're much more familiar with that. Sedimentary copper basically is exactly what it says. It's copper that is deposited in sedimentary units. And you have to look at it from an oil and gas kind of perspective, that the copper at some point in its history is fluidized. It needs faults to move through, and then it needs a trap system. So you need some kind of impervious layer, you need folding, that kind of thing. So it's quite heavy on the structural, and it's very heavy on the sedimentology, which again, I find especially the sedimentology is something that people try and steer away from in this industry.
Well, are you looking for copper only, or are other metals in your wheelhouse?
Yeah, so copper is obviously the main mineral or element that we're looking for here, and that's what we see distributed through this system. But the way that this copper forms is it's from that basin, that Purcell Basin, that would have been an evaporating sea. So the water gets trapped in the pore structure of these rocks, and it becomes extremely caustic. It becomes very, very kind of almost acidic. It will move through the sediment pile and scavenge other metals. And when I mentioned the Sullivan mine earlier, these fluids are getting right down into those layers that host the Sullivan mine, bringing them back up through faults. And so, although the Sullivan mine isn't known for copper, it does have it in a low concentration. And the way that the chemistry works is that fluid moving through will preferentially dissolve the copper and bring it to surface. But what it also does is it brings other elements, particularly silver and cobalt, up with it as well. And so, we often find silver, in 8 grams per ton kind of silver in our rocks associated with the copper. In some places, it's more favorable towards cobalt, but those are the two kind of main accessory elements that we're getting with the copper that we find.
Hmm. Well, it's interesting, in the moment in time we're talking, as the role of an investment thesis in critical minerals is gaining attention like never before. I mean, for example, Canadian government has come out with a new budget. They've included a pretty big promise to invest and support critical minerals projects. What's your response to what the feds say, that they're planning for?
It's great to see this. It is nice to see the tip of the hat towards these projects. I've just returned from a 2-day conference down in Cranbrook, the Mineral South conference there. The budget came out while we were there, but we had local government on site as well that were able to talk a little bit more about it. I think traditionally these funds have been used a lot more to promote more near mining scenarios and maybe kind of extraction. But there definitely seems to be some language built into this budget now that's going to come back and look at the exploration stage. I think where I'm most interested to see is where we go on the provincial level from this now. Is this going to encourage kind of more support on a provincial level? Because that's where the permitting, the mineral titles, the Lands Act, etc., are all being administered from on that more local level. So, it's really, really good to see. I also like the fact that there's been a bit of a restructuring in the local government and provincial government as well, that we now have a dedicated Ministry of Mining and Critical Metals. We're not lumped with energy anymore, which was the focus before. Those are separate bodies now. And then also below that, on the province, we've created a mines competitive and mines competitive and authorization division. So it's all kind of new. So there's a lot of, we get the support from the federal government, but now we're starting to see that creep in on the provincial level as well. And that kind of trickle down into local support is really, really important. And I will say something, in my 20 years as a geologist in Canada, well, working worldwide, this summer, we actually hosted government geologists that were coming out to look at critical metals and supply potential in BC, and they visited the Kookanusa site. They visited another site in the Purcell Basin as well, to our neighbors there. And that's the first time I've ever seen that. They spent an entire day walking around looking at the rocks. And so even just getting people like that to the field to see what we're doing on the grassroots level, and them going back and reporting that and feeding that back into, this could one day be a big project. It's quite heartening to see that.
Well, what's in place right now at Kookanusa to be drill ready? And when is upcoming drilling planned for?
Yeah, so we're in a really good position right now. As I said, we've held this project in a private space for 7 years now. A lot of this has been worked on in the background, mainly to de-risk it before we took the company public, which we did back in May. So as it stands right now, the western side of our project area, which is the kind of direct link between the Crest and Rivet formation, which is what Hecla is sitting on. We have our drill permits in place. They were awarded to us in July. We worked with First Nations and local community quite extensively over the last few years. And so we have agreements in place with the Shuswap and Tanaha. Some of the conditions of the permitting, which are pretty standard now, was to look at heritage, so archaeological studies in the area to make sure that we're not going to disturb anything, and then wildlife management planning as well. So all of those have been completed. So basically, we could roll out there tomorrow and start drilling on this project. So the current financing that we've got going on is purely to support that drill program that we want to start doing. We'll say Q1 next year, probably more towards the end of it, because we know it's conference season. But we'll get out there and as soon as we can. And the workup on the targets that we've got, as you mentioned, we've got about 19 different targets on this site. but we've probably brought 4 of them up to a level where we're ready to drill.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a very early stage opportunity for anyone watching to assess, especially with drilling upcoming next year. Why now? Why should investors pay attention to Aeonian?
It's the opportunity. There's I've worked on a lot of projects before where they just come packaged up. This is it. But we have spent a lot of time working with First Nations. We've been going into communities. We've been educating. We've gone into local colleges and talked to people about it. We've been at the local county fair every summer and participated in that and actually spoken to people. There's a lot of support. So Teck is very well known in this area with the coal mining stuff that's just off to the east of us. That's winding down essentially from Teck, and so there's a lot of people we're finding are coming to us and looking for a new source of revenue for the area and a new sense of employment and opportunities, and that includes First Nations as well. So the First Nations group, Shuswap, they've developed a business arm called Kempesket. They're trying to template themselves on a lot of the First Nation bands as we see in the north, like with the Tautan, where they have a much more kind of, that kind of inclusivity in local work and exploration and everything. So we've got that side of it sorted. So all of those social issues that people are talking about, they're the hot topic in BC right now, getting your permits, getting the land, getting people on site, all of that is done. We're trading fairly low. We're definitely at the entry level of things, which is a good thing. We're affordable to get in there. But we also, with the discovery, people smarter than me that work with me at the company, I'm very much the geologist, but the investor relations and that, they're saying, we've got a really good chance of being re-rated because of the fact that we're trading low right now. We've got this great opportunity to go out and discover a system that is in the States represents 2 billion pounds of copper in a kilometer-long footprint. And we've got a 50-kilometer-long corridor to explore. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take money to explore that, but I can't think of de-risking this any further. Now we've got to get out there and drill. And I think it's, I want people to get as excited about it as I am. I can't wait to get out there and see what we see.
Well, being permitted and having the relationships in place are two of the most important things that, I hear over and over again. Mm-hmm. So I feel compelled here to do my own research, and I encourage my audience to do the same. Andy, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. It's been good to talk to you.
Aeonian Resources is on CEO.CA with a dedicated channel where you can go and see what the community members are saying today, into the future, whenever you want to check out the website. Thanks for watching.